Truth and values in science medicine, and I think it's an interesting topic, and so the outline of my talk will be a general discussion about values in science and medicine, and the is and the ought problem. So what is factual truth and what should be. Then I talk about cognitive foolishness and cognitive vice. Then thought reform and totalism. Then present day, examples of present day cognitive foolishness with examples from SM, the science and medicine. So don't have another meaning of this. Then the strategy of penetration in science medicine via the academia and institutions and ideological reinforcement devices. So David Hume has proposed, in fact, two types of truth. One is called the factual truth, what is, in fact, David Hume's is. And then the second is what is in fact, David Hume's ought. And I call this truth 1.0 or truth 2.0. When we look on the interaction about science and values, there is, of course, strong interaction between both, and they're interdependent because of grant proposals, of, let's say, definition of areas that will be funded or not funded, and so forth. So in that sense, science and the politics are interdependent. So there's a flow, a theoretical scheme where you have values in the middle which are connected through science and society. And this in both directions. This is the theoretical scheme. But already Max Weber in the 20s, in what we call the Wert-Urteilsstreit, that means the debate about values. He said, es können niemals Aufgaben der Erfahrungswissenschaften sein, bindende Normen und Ideale zu ermitteln, daraus für die Praxis Rezepte ableiten zu können. So, in fact, so what he was saying, that you cannot from the empirical science derive norms and ideals that may be from which you can derive praxis, that means conducts for society. Okay, so it's a strict separation between both in that view. So when we look about values, we have two types of values. There are epistemic values. Epistemic values, for instance, is gaining knowledge is good, and truth is the core value of knowledge. This is an epistemic value that every scientist has. What we have after, there's also societal values. That means the knowledge and how we acquire it must conform to society values. So there's a normative aspect to it. And of course, science has both, in fact, both types of values, but it depends on the extent. So there's now a resurgence, re-emergence of this I call this Wert-Urteilsstreit reborn. And there are a number of people, already 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, for instance, Helen Longino with the contextual empirism. And there's also Heather Douglas and other people who have discussed very clearly the interaction between values and science. The problem is that people that are on the value side, that means values are very important in science, and when I say values, it's social values. That means that these values are directing where science has to go. But it has a danger, because we can ask which values and who is determining it. We can ask what type of research is allowed and what type is not allowed. How we distinguish science that should be done or science that should not be done, and what is a minimal value framework. So we have to have values belief and values ideology. And this can be depicted the following. You have the is, that is the factual truth, and then you have the ought, so how society and how research should be done, how society sees research and how research should be done. But then you can have a hypertrophic ought. It can become very big and really impact on the quality of the research that you are doing, and especially on the orientation, and decide what you should do and not do. And recently this has been my scheme, so this was from an article that I've published, has been taken up by James Kaufman in this paper. And in fact this is a very nice representation where you have the is and the ought. So we have the amplified ought here that impacts on the is, and this creates an ideological loop. And the ideological loop will then determine the interpretation of your results, research results, and may lead to self-confirmatory beliefs. So this is the problem that we face, how big this value influence should be. So there are extreme examples of hypertrophic value penetration into science. Communist ideology, of course, with Lysenkism and what we know about it, so I will not go into detail. And there's the Nazi science also by Philipp Lenard and Johannes Stark, two Nobel Prize winners. But they were these people, I will talk only about the Nazis now, they were for German physics. They didn't want to have quantum mechanics, they didn't want to have relativity and stuff like this, because this all was Jewish science. So, but there are many other examples of this very hypertrophic value that may impact on the science, and the ideology that can be promoted in academia can bring society into mortal danger. And there's a very important book, La Trahison des Clercs, The Treason of the Clerics, by Julian Benda, who attacked in his time what he called the clerics. That means all the intellectual, that means university, academics, journalists, all people that are on the non-productive side of society. And he attacked them because at that time, right-wing was the norm in the academia. Fascist ideology, right-wing, okay? So he attacked this, what he called clerics of order. And at the same token, Robert Musil, very important writer, he talked about stupidity, über Dummheit. But über die Dummheit for him had two meanings. Of course, there's this normal Dummheit, people that are not really at the level, but also very smart people. Very smart people can be very dumb, very, very dumb, and do things that are totally driven by unsound beliefs. And this is what he was talking about. And analytical philosopher Kevin Mulligan, he wrote a very interesting piece that I found quite recently. That is the Academy of Foolishness 1927 to 1937. So he started with, of course, with Benda and Musil and Curtius also. And in fact, what he defined was two things: cognitive foolishness and cognitive vice. Two things that are really important and that are at the root of Dummheit, of stupidity, for smart people, I think. So he says, for instance, indeed, Benda noted that the betrayal of the clerisy in the 50 years preceding 1927 was no more fashion, but could be followed by the contrary movement. Postmodernism, suspicion of the values and truth and knowledge, is a direct descendant of the tradition of thought analyzed by Benda and Musil. Our immediate consequence of the characterization of foolishness proposed here is that postmodernism is foolish, and that postmodernists, if sincere, are to that extent foolish. This is a pleasing consequence, but of course being pleased by the consequence of one's view is to hover over the abyss of foolishness or wars. I think it's a very, very poignant statement. So another aspect that we encounter now is thought reform. There is so this thought reform has been coined by Lifton, who did research. Lifton is still alive. He's very old, 90, 98 or something like this, and he is a psychologist from the Ericsson School. And he interviewed people that went through the Chinese brainwashing. And this is really, I mean, I recommend to everyone to read this, because you see really how that thought reform or brainwashing, Chinese brainwashing, is working and how instrumental that was. So, but one insight, an important insight that he has, that one-sided exploitation of existential guilt is thought reform's trump card. So when you have guilt, it's the worstest thing that you can have, because thought reform can be very effective in this case. So you should watch also the YouTube of Lifton's, so where he is explaining all this. So thought reform is really efficient because, for instance, in China, it was with self-criticism, all the intellectuals, they had self-criticism and confessions. They had to go to work on the countryside. They had science and engineering was changed to Soviet rule, and thought reform process was highly efficient. At about 2 months from the date of arrest of people, they were ready to begin the recognition of the crimes. Okay? So, in fact, it's a cult. I mean, all these are cults. And this is a general scheme that I've drawn up of cults and counter-cults, where you have the ringleaders of the cults, then you have believers, opportunists, enablers, which are at present the agencies, institutions, universities, academia, and cultural societies. And you have ignorant followers, lack of courage, heretics, but then you have reactionaries, and they can start from the reactionary a new cult. And it goes like this. Now, what is the present-day foolishness? Present-day foolishness, to my view, there are two lines. One is more the leftist line with critical theories, critical race theory, critical pedagogy, queer theory, and so forth. And on the right, you have, of course, all the fascistic ideologies with Trumpism and so forth. But what they have, in fact, in common is they have generative teams. They are problemizing this. You can listen, for instance, Putin. It's an example of that. Then you have the decoding, then you have the crisis, and the new transformed consciousness should arise. So now, foolishness, I will only talk about the foolishness in the academia. That means on the left side of this scheme that you have seen. So this is a general scheme where you have three arms, in fact 4, but I talk about 3. From the critical theory, from decolonization movement, and POMO movement. So from the critical theory, you have critical race theory and intersectionality, which impacts at the university and so forth. Then you have the decolonization movement, and from postmodern, Foucault, Derrida, the main influence is on genderqueer theory, but also in part on with the intersectionality also on the other arm of this foolishness. And this impacts at universities and institutions education. And this is reinforced by GAFAM and big capital and so forth. And then I call this beast, generated beast, a very strange animal, gendered and racialized capitalo-Marxism. It's an absolute strange thing that you have both, in fact, things that hate each other altogether. But it's, it's like this, and this is influencing, in fact, the education and society in general. So now, how this unfolds in the practice. So the epistemic foundations have to be attacked. You have standpoint, epistemology, anti-modernity, and Western Enlightenment, critical race theory, and white supremacist culture. Then you have also politics and society, the decolonization and debunking, whiteness, Eurocentrism, race, and applying race-gender criteria. And then you have the practice, that means it's translated into practice by hiring students, faculty, based on group identity, cancel culture, the requirements for job, publication, citation justice, medical education, anti-racist requirements, and medical treatments tailored to group identity. And how, in fact, the question is how biomedical research in that circumstance can be done in clinical practice, replacing the epistemic foundation, debunking racism, sexism everywhere, reducing every health disparity to these variables, and tailor treatment according to CRT and gender criteria. So this is just some examples that we see from several journals that you see: Nature, Science, Systemic Race Science, Must Listen, Learn and Change, What to Do Better Science. Admit that you are not objective. This is Angela Saini, who was really well-known activist, in fact, and writer. And human genetics need an anti-racist plan. So this came just out in Nature. So these are Springer Nature requirement, or not requirements, but recommendations still. So we should not, would another phrase like people assigned male at birth be more accurate? Humankind should be replacing mankind. So what we thought language reform. Then statements like these should be included into scientific papers. We acknowledged that uterine cancer can affect people assigned female at birth, AFAB, regardless of their gender identity and expression. The study, however, only includes data from cisgendered women as such. For the purpose of this article, we use the word woman to refer to cisgender women. For further research studies, we recommend including people with different gender identity and so forth. You have all this type of things that are in fact said in this thing. And then you have language reform, caregiver instead of mom, dad, and parents, useless. Then you have pregnant woman and people, or only pregnant people instead of pregnant woman. East Asian instead of Oriental because of Orientalism, this type of European fashion of the Orientals. They should no more say Oriental, please. And white people and Caucasian. So don't say any more Caucasian, say only white people. I mean, it's a black and white ideology. So there's a lot of stuff also, for instance, in the neuroscience, neurology, you have a lot of things coming up, like neurological care for LGBT people plus. That means that LGBTQ plus people are special in terms of neurology. I mean, if they have a stroke, okay, there's a stroke treatment, huh? So, and so on. I mean, you have all this type in nature. Then the other thing is the declaration, so the day declarations. That means the diversity, equity, inclusion declaration. In papers, we actively worked to promote diversity in our reference list, so you can even screen your references with applied software, and that will screen, and that will replace your first author should be then a woman, mainly black, and so the last author should be maybe a man, black. So you should readjust your reference list. We have included some reference enhanced diversity. To assess the diversity of our reference, we obtained predicted gender of the first and last author of each reference by using database that store the probability of the first name being carried by a woman. And the application is genderap.com. We look forward to future work that could help us to better understand how support an equitable practice in science. And then you have this. I mean, this is two sisters in Paris and Danny Bassett. So they are writing a lot of this stuff. I mean, so the Danny Bassett is an outstanding scientist. Huh? Outstanding, high impact, very highly cited in neuroscience field, really, really top. But at the same time, they're doing this stuff together, such as the story of science, an objective hunt for ineffable truths performed primarily by a lone genius white man has pernicious effects not only on those aspiring to science, but also for well-established scientists who hold marginal identities. Okay, so this is very strange. Many efforts exist already to contextualize scientific progress outside the dominant narrative of white, masculine European triumph, including visibility platforms in print forms, online databases, and so on. So now in the clinical practice and in teaching, you have this. There is at least critical race theory-related ideas found mandatory programs in 58 of top 100 US med schools. And you have also student associations like White Coat for Black Lives and so on that are really, really activists and doing a lot of activist propaganda. In public health domain, though they have Michelle Morse. So she's the main officer. She was before in Boston head, and she's the main officer now for in New York State in the department. And for her, racism is the risk factor, not race. We should consider race in order to advance equity. For example, non-white race and Latinx ethnicity are social risk factors for severe COVID because of long-standing structural racism. And there's been also commentary in the New England Journal of Medicine about her. Well, shabby reasoning, because, for instance, they want to put structural racism in, for instance, if you have renal insufficiency. So structural racism is a causal factor of renal insufficiency when we know that renal insufficiency and renal dysfunctioning is multi-causal, there's a lot of genetic factors and environmental and whatsoever. So this is totally shabby reasoning. Again, racism is the risk factor, not race. Then, in this paper, 2024 paper, is the C3D Dream framework, where they put the different systems of power and oppressive forms of power. So they have oppressive systems of power, interpersonal racism and institutional racism and structural racism. And all this is causal, totally causal, and uniquely causal because of the blank slate theory of hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and so on. So that is very strange. This is not science, but ideology. They know nothing about causal inference and reasoning. Chemistry. This is from science. This is not from bioscience. But so they have now Afrochemistry, a kind of course that they teach. This is a 2024 course semester. Students will apply chemical tools to analyze and understanding black life in the US, and students will implement African American sensibilities to analyze chemistry. Diverse historical and contemporary scientists, intellectuals, and chemical discoveries will inform personal reflections and proposals for addressing inequities in chemistry and chemical education. Well, I mean, look, I mean, it's mad. So then we had our good friend Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief in The Lancet. So he wrote a very egregious piece, and I could not resist to answer. And I wrote my answer up to this piece, and I didn't think it will go in. I didn't think at all they will reject it, and they published it. And I said, okay, Lancet, even if you are totally egregious in several aspects, at least my hat off. So what this Richard Horton said, his argument was Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, who was close to the Frankfurt School, and of course, he was jailed afterwards in Italy and died in jail. But he wrote up his books, his carnet, and where all his theories about why Western societies had not had the revolution. Because, of course, in the Western societies, there were devices that block it. And so you have to undermine the society and the culture within. This has been taken up by Rudi Dutschke, for instance, in Germany, who said, I mean, it's what they call the long march à travers les institutions, the long march through the institutions. So he said that we have to again engage in a struggle of ideas, a war of positions. In the medical journal, a war of positions, editor-in-chief, I could not resist. The culture war is not a Manichaean object. It needs a highly differentiated analysis. People with left-wing beliefs can be critical to both right-wing and left-wing identitarians. Susan Neiman defends this position from the left vigorously, and the recent book should be obliged reading for everyone. Furthermore, the fragmented and ill-structured piece contained a multitude of mixed-up topics such as immigration, xenophobia, and identitarian movement. So I really attacked him pretty harsh. So still, I mean, for instance, his way to argument was really very strange. So I gave the advice. My advice is focused to publishing first-class medical research, which would do much more good to serve the common good. In 2023, an article echoes this sentiment, reporting that the general public is losing trust in science when too much politicization and ideologization is published in scientific and biomedical journals. Okay. Leading medical and scientific journals should focus on what they do the best, publishing first-rate, high-quality research. They should deal with political issues only when such issues directly affect medicine and science. Okay, so this is what we have also to conclude. We have ideological reinforcement loops. There is this what is called concept creep by Nick Haslam. So this is psychologically expanding concepts of harm. And it will, I mean, ideas that at one moment are absolutely not harmful become harmful later on. They are problematized. Then the second is psychogenic contamination and herd behavior, which we have all around. And the third is strategical equivocation. So it's the Mott and Bailey. That is, in fact, you push one argument, in fact, behind your argument is a soft argument, you have the hard one, okay? It's like the Trojan horse. So, and the entrism is characterized by step-by-step demands, progressive, followed by institutional enabling, lack of resistance, cowardice, and this is entrism. So this undermines the academia in a large extent. So what we have, in fact, we have the individual, the scientist, the medicine, the physician, I don't know, the people working in the academia or in hospitals. They are facing concept creep, they're facing thought reform, they're facing herd behavior all around them, they're facing enabling institutions of ideology, they're facing strategic equivocation and a hypertrophic ought. And this, the individual is faced by two opposite forces. One is moral clarity and epistemic security on one side. On the other side, cognitive vice and cognitive foolishness. And you have to be very morally clear and strong and have epistemic security to withstand this. There's some hope, small hope. So MIT, for instance, stopped using these statements in faculty hiring. Ad hoc committees, academic freedoms are now created in several. UT Austin lays off dozens of workers in a day. And there's also so a vote, there's also some votes against the statement and policies. So I don't know if I'm too optimistic that I call this a day inflection point. I don't know if we have reached the day inflection point now, but at least in Europe, it's on the rise. And this is worrisome because Europe lacking always behind the US. So they may undergo the same mistakes. To the end, I just want to end this with William Butler Yeats. That is a very nice phrasing of the current situation. Turning and turning the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conventions, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. William Butler Yeats, The Second Coming. Thank you very much.
So thank you for your presentation. I have two questions. The first one is, would you agree that there are still some positive aspects to this inclusion? For example, when you are talking about tests, when it was mainly done with a model of a man, obviously, we said that the female body is different, so now we are including more female test subjects, for example, for car crash dummies, and more female-based subjects, for example, the research about endometriosis. And would you agree that it's a positive thing that is coming from this movement? And then my second question is, we've talked a lot about the left and the extremism of this part, but you've mentioned quite quickly the right wing. Just before when you presented both of them, and I was just wondering what you think about. I've seen that you've written that you oppose Trump and the right wing, but do you think that this ideology is also present in the US universities, and how does it affect academia research? Is it the same effects that the left, for example, here the cognitive bias and foolishness, or not?
So the thing is, so for the first question, I think the first question is that, in fact, you need to account of specific woman physiology, and that's good. Because it's even not related to the woke movement at all. It's something that has been neglected for a number of times. You know, you have, I mean, for instance, if you look at the androgen levels in men and women, when you measured it by mass spectrometry, 10 times more in men than in women, okay? And the same with the estrogen. So these hormones have receptors in the brain, and they are conditioning also disease and in part behavior. And it's normal, that should be studied, and if it can be studied, then it's good, it should be, but it is not really related, or I don't see it really strongly related.
But it occurred at the same time, around the same time, when women started working in research, suddenly there was research about the subjects.
Yeah, right, but it came afterwards, but it's not really strictly related what the social justice people say, okay? It's something that comes out of taking into account the difference between sexes. And there are differences between sexes. The men, women are not the same. They're equal in rights, but not the same. They have hormonal differences, specific psychology, but so the differences should not be regarded as meaning women have only to do homework, work in the at home, or the stuff like this. Is not at all, but there are differences, you know.
So you don't make the link between the movements,
I don't think it's a real link. It's an indirect link. And for your what was your second question?
Yes, about the right-wing movement. So you've mentioned quite quickly about Trump and this extremist right-wing ideology. Do you think it's also present in the academic research, and how does it affect it?
No, in the university I don't see it predominant. There may be some very small corners, but the universities are dominated by the left and by the far left also. So the thing is that this is not, I mean, we are not back in 1932, 1933, 1927, where the right wing dominated the university, the real radical right wing. They were in the university, and even in Germany, for instance, they didn't let Jews enter the universities, you know. I mean, students, they blocked the Jews, okay? So that's the basic. So the fight in the universities, unfortunately, I must say, is against. It's against the ideology, and I don't divide now the world into right and left anymore. In rational people, rational thinking people, humanists against the extremists. That's
I
the
had
way
this
I'm dividing.
question because of the first presentation, where we've seen that one paper was retracted because it was used by the right wing to confirm.
It may happen, but it's not. It's not a general. It's not a general thing, you know. The academia. There's you want.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question of clarification. I didn't quite catch the difference between cognitive vice and cognitive foolishness. They're both types of Dummheit.
Yes.
Is cognitive vice what Orwell said about some ideas being so stupid that only intellectuals would believe them? Is that what?
No. Vice is that you use your foolish ideas against people. That means you are implementing your crazy ideas become praxis. And this is cognitive vice. Okay? When you elaborate the way to implement that, this is cognitive vice. Foolishness is just you become crazy with these ideas. That's the okay? So have we any other questions now? No? Yeah, Corey. Okay.
Yeah, mine's kind of a follow-up to your question, because I do think that, you know, these things, you know, a movement starts and they transform over time. And so I would put, like, you know, we need to consider models for both men and women in science, probably like an early version of this movement, but then it transformed into something where now actually some of the journals are saying, you know, you can't even ask people about their gender, and you can't report it, and you can't analyze your data. And so we end up losing that piece that we introduced by presumably the same types of people. So I guess my question is, like, when do you think that shift occurred? And what do you think caused the shift?
The shift of what?
Moving from, like, you know, let's treat women the same as men. Yeah, traditional feminism. Let's treat women, and let's when we're applying theories and, you know, technology to humans, let's make sure we're thinking about both men and women. When did that transform into, you know, what you're calling woke, or denying that sexes exist?
Yes, I'm not clear about the dates. how that happening. I mean the so maybe in the 90s in the 90s and 2000s, somehow like that. But I'm not clear yet because I did not thought really carefully about it. Okay, so I have to search a little bit more in that direction. But it's I think it's because you have the early feminism. You have the early feminism, which is in fact, equal rights, representation, blah blah, all this, what all decent human being is for. I mean, every decent human being cannot deny that. That's why you are here, why you are in the academia, you are giving talks and so on. This is what we. But the other side is in fact this kind of where we had the influence, let's say the damaging influence of the studies, mainly of people.
Like the studies disciplines, you mean?
Yeah, studies disciplines, and starting from Foucault, Derrida, and all this, and the Pomos, and also critical theorists. I mean, when you look on what sometimes Jürgen Habermas said, it's not so nice for science also. I mean, but I think it's an important point, so I will check the details a little bit more, okay?
I had a comment about the fact that indeed female patients or women are most of the time excluded when developing the drugs, especially in the early phase trials. It has nothing to do with some kind of misogynism or something like that. It's purely technical. When we start the early clinical trials, the first in man trials, well, the first in human trials, and the phase 1 trials, which are designed to determine the recommended phase 2 dosing, which will be the actual dosing and the scheduling, telling you how we will use the drug. For a very technical reason, when we start those trials, all the animal testing are not over yet, especially the teratogenicity. So the investigators have no idea regarding the possible impact of the drug or pregnancy. And for this reason, because we have no information, and that's just a kind of, principe de précaution, all the women are excluded from the phase 1 trials because we just cannot take the risk that there is some kind of accidental pregnancy or hidden pregnancy, and just in case there is some kind of fetal toxicity, it just would be a catastrophe. So first, we don't take any woman. And on top of that, it's not against women. We don't take all people as well. And basically, if you look at the phase 1 trials, we just take healthy volunteers. I mean, when I was a student, I was a healthy volunteer because it's easy. I mean, I was in a medical, campus, and it's very easy because the investigator center is just nearby. And basically, all the people, when you perform phase 1 trials, again, they are PharmD students, medical students, and we were all between 20 and 25. We have perfect renal function, liver function. We don't smoke. We are not into drugs. We don't drink coffee. We don't drink alcohol. So some kind of no, it's forbidden. No, you don't. No, you can't. When you are enrolled in a clinical trial, you can't. You have no co-medication. So we are kind of unicorns, and that's a big issue. That's a big trouble. That's a big trouble with the pharmaceutical company, that the drugs actually, especially the early phases, the drug is developed on a kind of population who has nothing to do with the actual patients in terms of sex, in terms of age, in terms of comorbidities, in terms of co-medication. And that's why the drug, we have so many issues with the drugs in terms of dosing, because they are not properly developed as they should be. But it's not it's not a political agenda. It's just the way the pharmaceutical companies work. That's it.
Yeah, but let's say the only point is that, however, in some disease states, the difference between sexes has not so well analyzed. For instance, there have been papers in brain tumors. You can do transcriptomic from brain tumors in women and men and so forth, and there are differences. So I think, so maybe, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. I agree with all this, but in some extent, to some extent, we should maybe look also more into these differences in parts. Let's say, for instance, we are interested in brain tumors, so I think should be pretty interesting because the brain is a hormonal reservoir, you know. So, okay, good. So, Yves, you want to ask something? Okay, so we have Joseph Ciccolini now.